Welcome to the Roundup, True Crime with Mike. Here I give you an update to current cases so you can quickly catch up on today's or this week's happenings on some public cases. Okay, today I am joined here by Brett, who's from now several podcasts, the Prosecutors, Legal Briefs, and have legal. You're also starting what legal analysis or legal training. Is that coming up?
Well, we're going to do that as part of our Substack that we launched. We're going to have regular articles sort of explaining complicated areas of the law. So it's not a new podcast, but just something we'll be doing.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for the explanation. So I wanted to talk about a case that our friend Rob Chadwick, who passed away earlier this year, really cared about, and it came back in the news like last week. So I just wanted to go over the case first, then what happened this week, and what we think where it might go from there. So I want to talk about a case that happened in Winter Grove, Florida, on Christmas Eve, 1975. I was 6 days old at the time, so I have clear memories of this case. Just kidding. So we also we also talked about when it was at Orlando. We thought about like if we were going to go there, we were going to go by this furniture store and see it, but we did not go. But when Crime Con was out in Orlando, so the story deals with a quadruple murder with a fifth person shot at a furniture store, as I said, in Winter Grove. Deals with the story of Tommy Zeigler. He was the owner of Zeigler Furniture at the time. And then so I wanted to start with the timeline. You guys always go in good depth. So I'm going to try and see what I can do. There is a bunch of forensics. There's 5 guns, 4 bodies, 5 people shot, staging of the crime, and a whole bunch, and more people involved. So starting with the timeline that I have, and this came from a book called Fatal Flaw by Philip Finch. So hopefully, I think he did an investigation of it, and he is on the side of wanting to get. He thinks Tommy Zeigler is innocent, so it is on the opposite side. So it's not just a pro guilt side. So I will start in the morning. So in the morning, Maddie and Charlie Mays went to Zeigler Furniture and picked out some linoleum, along with Zeigler offering Charlie a new TV on a cash plan. So in that morning, I guess they picked up the linoleum. Charlie put the $50 down on his account for the linoleum and the TV, and Tommy told Charlie to come back at 7:30 at that night to pick it up. So that's what I mean. So he was telling Charlie, "Hey, come meet me in the back of the store at 7:30 p.m. I'll give you the TV." So, and then in the middle of the day, Edward Williams, he'll have a major part of this, came to stop by the help. And he was also told by Zeigler to meet him at his house at 7:30 that night. So another person, sorry, there's a lot of people involved. Curtis Dunaway was somebody that worked at the store. He actually switched cars with Tommy during the day. Zeigler said his father-in-law was coming over to pick up some stuff that night. And Curtis asked if he could help and said no, and that Williams was actually going to help him with any furniture or moving some stuff that night. So at 6 p.m., the store was closed, and Zeigler told Dunaway to turn off the lights, which wasn't normal, but it was Christmas Eve, so there would be a reason to keep it more dark on a Christmas Eve than another night. So Dunaway left Ziegler's house around 7 p.m. At 7:20, a woman named Barbara Spencer, or Spacer, I'm not sure, heard 3 or 4 explosions from when she was near the store. 15 or 20 minutes later, she heard another series of reports, and more than the first time. So there's like two. She heard different gunshots at different times. At 7:30, Kenneth and Linda Roach heard 1 gunshot as they drove past, and then they heard like 10 more, and a few minutes later. Barbara Woodward said that between 7:30 and 8:30, she saw 2 cars in front of the store's entrance. One car was green, the other she wasn't sure about, though, and she thought she saw Zeigler at the front of the store. Edward Williams went to Ziegler's place and said at 7:30, he saw a sign at the door that said Tommy would be right back, so he waited in his pickup truck for Zeigler. At Minister Fisher received a call from Zeigler about 9:10 or a little after 9 p.m. that night, saying that he had been shot. And then a dispatch call was logged at 9:21 that an officer was going to the store. Zeigler had been shot in the abdomen, and Zeigler had said Mays had shot him. So that's kind of the rough outline, but I also wanted to get into one of the sub stories too. Any questions about that timeline so far?
No, I mean, like you said, this is one that involves a lot of people. Every time we do a case with this many people, we get lots of "I'm so confused." So hopefully people have the general idea. There were a lot of people who are going to be at this store conveniently for this crime.
Okay. So according to Edward Williams, his story was that at 7:30 he went over, as I said, he went over to Zeigler's house, and there was a note for him. He said he'd be right back, and so he waited in his pickup truck for Zeigler to come by. So what he said then, that Zeigler came by and picked him up, and he noticed that there was blood on Ziegler's pants. So he said, "Hey, what's going on?" And they said, "Well, just come with me to the store." So they go to the store, and he says around 8:20, somewhere in there, that he was out in front, and then Zeigler approached him and was carrying a gun. And what William's story was that Zeigler tried to shoot him. The gun jammed and didn't fire. So he ran off. So his story was he ran off, and then he went to a KFC that was across the store or across the street. Tried to call the police from there. He could not reach. I guess he didn't call 911, but he tried to call the police. It was the wrong number. So he got in his car, scared out of his mind, and he drove all the way to Orlando to get away. And then in Orlando, he called the sheriff's office there. I guess he called a friend first, told him what happened, and that that he then that he first talked to a sheriff in a different department. They said they don't really know anything. You need to talk to Winter Grove, and they kind of hung up on him. So he finally got a hold of Winter Grove, and then he told him kind of the story of what happened. That he went over with Zeigler to the store. Zeigler fired at him and misfired, and then he ran away. So
and I would just note, I mean, this is what, 1976 when all this happened?
Yeah.
So I don't know when 911 came online or when it became something everybody knew about, but I don't know that he would necessarily think to dial 911 at the time. So his story about trying to call the police is probably a little bit more believable than it would be today.
Okay. So thanks. I forgot about that. So yeah. Okay. So that's the story. So the cops arrived there around 9:20. I mean, they get around 9:10. They see that that Zeigler was shot in the stomach. So they take him to the hospital. And he undergoes surgery to find out what happened to the bullet. They found out the bullet missed all the vital organs, and he was okay. So they patched him up, and he was recovering. And then I think the next day, they came to arrest him in the hospital because by that time they had believed he was the one that actually did the shooting. So in reading about it, some of the things with the cop or the detective went there that night was noticing was just where all the why it's so forensically a problem is there's bodies in different places of it. Two people, the two guys in there had been beaten along with being shot. So all four people had been shot. It looked like there was blood at different parts. The bodies have been moved. So let's go over the people that were there that night that were killed in the store. So the first one was Eunice, which was Tommy Zeigler's wife. The other was, hang on one second. I think I told you. Eunice's parents, Perry and Virginia Edwards. And then the last one was Charlie Mays. So those are the four people that were killed in the store, along with it. So, and also they found 5 different guns in the store. I guess as somebody is a gun expert, you'd be kind of impressed. Or 38 Special is probably a shotgun. Zeigler had said that, hey, the reason why he had so many guns was because he was a store owner that did a lot of cash, and that there had been some robberies in the area. So he was very protective. But all 5, and we'll get back to it, all 5 guns were found in the store. So according to what the belief that the cops came up with and what they thought happened was that the wife, the father-in-law, and the mother-in-law all came to the store around 7 o'clock or a little bit or before. He killed them first, and then was working on that. And then he went back, then he went over and saw. I guess I'm trying to think. I don't know if they know the exact timeline. Then that Charlie would come over and he found them all there and say what happened. So Ziegler shot him, and then he went over to his house and met Williams, gave him a ride, and then went back and that was where the gun was fired, and he ran up. And then probably around 8:45 or 9 o'clock was when Ziegler shot himself, trying to make it look like a burglary. So that's kind of the main story of what happened. He was charged in the murder. I don't think there was anything crazy that I know about, like no, just a single trial for it. So I don't think there was anything crazy about that. He was convicted and was put on death row. The two things that Rob really pointed out and that thought gave him a bad light was that afterwards while he was in prison, he had offered somebody in jail a lot of money, like $50,000, to take the fall for the crime. Gave him the details of the crime and said, "Hey, here's $50,000. You claim that you did it." And then the other one that he did was that he put out a contract, or he tried to get a contract on his dad for not supporting him after he ran out of money. He's like, "I'm not going to pay for any more of your appeals." So he put out, asked for a contract on his dad. I don't know if those are bad things. I mean, they're bad things. I don't think. I mean, I don't know if it's in light, because I mean, I think if you were in a desperate situation, I could see you kind of doing both of those things. So I don't think it was that much. But so let's go over some of the things why I think this was why the cops thought, and why I think it was probably an inside job, and why he was the one who did it, was because why would you burglar, if you were just robbing the store, why would you stage the bodies? I mean, normally if you're just trying to grab the cash, you grab the cash, you run out the front door, and you're done. So that was kind of one of them. There was 4 different. I mean, the periods of when there were shots, there were 15, 30 minutes apart that people heard it. The forensics at the time thought, as I was reading, was that the blood was dried on one person by the time the other person was shot. So they said it was at least 15 minutes between the shootings. The other one was that, I'm not a doctor, but I don't know if you got shot in the abdomen, would you fall? Would you get knocked unconscious for 2 hours and then wake back up and call and not have severe blood loss and not die from a shot in the abdomen 2 hours? Because he didn't call anybody until 9:10. The shots were about 7 or 7:30. So those are some of the things. And the other one is, if you were going to go to the trouble of bludgeoning all the guys, and you just shot Ziegler and he was unconscious, why didn't you double tap him or bludgeon him too? Why would you leave him alive knowing that he could identify you?
Yeah, and I think it's always a little dangerous to ask, why wouldn't you do something? Because criminals do dumb things. But I think it's important for people who are listening to this to know the whole Ziegler's theory is that these were some ruthless guys. I mean, Mays was one of the robbers, and they, according to him, they killed him basically just to keep him from talking. Ziegler says he gets shot in the stomach, and he sort of hears somebody say, Mays is down, finish him off, right? Can't, he's wounded, so we have to kill him. Can't leave him behind. So these are some guys who are really thinking about this. And I think you're right. It's always, in a lot of these cases, I think of the Jeffrey McDonald case out of North Carolina, where he's stabbed in the chest, has a collapsed lung. And that's one of the arguments people use. Darla Routier, her throat is cut. Those are bad things, but they pale in comparison to the level of damage done to all the other victims. All the other victims, you made sure they were dead. They were all brutally murdered. You got shot in the stomach. That's bad, but it also happens to be one of the wounds that everybody knows is one that takes you the longest to die from, the one that's least likely to kill you instantaneously, right? That's just something that's common knowledge, and that's where he gets shot. It is a difficult thing to imagine, I think, for me and you sitting here, that anyone would shoot themselves in the stomach to cover up a crime. But this is a vicious crime. I mean, he's murdered 4 people at this point, right? I mean, if he did it, his wife, the thought is that she was the only person who didn't see it coming, because her body and her hands in her pocket, it seems like she doesn't know anything's going to happen. But then everybody else, there's signs of a struggle. One person has a shot through their hand, which indicates they had their hand up to try and defend themselves. This is a pretty brutal attack. So the good old fashioned forensics in this case are really bad for him. So obviously he's not relying on that. He's going to rely on DNA.
Okay. So I guess that leads us into kind of what has happened in the last week. I guess about a year ago, the local prosecutor came and said, hey, or the defense and the local prosecutor came and said, hey, we want to do some further DNA testing. The Attorney General's office out of Florida said, hey, there's nothing good's going to come out of this DNA testing. We're opposing it. So you had the case of 2 prosecutors, different offices, arguing about whether or not they should allow DNA testing for a while. I think it even got up to the Supreme Court of Florida about, hey, if the Attorney General's office says no DNA testing, do they allow it? But I guess what ended up happening, they did allow the DNA testing, and some of the results came in, I guess talked about last week. So let's, I guess, kind of go over that. What I understand, and they didn't have a whole lot in those articles, so you can read the articles about it. One was that they found no real blood on Zeigler's clothing, as I understand it. That we'll talk about it a little bit more, was that there was not a whole lot of blood on Zeigler's clothing. 2, I guess and it was known at the trial, so I'm not sure they had anything more. There was a tooth that was on the floor somewhere in the store that did not belong to anybody. So that was another piece of it. They did say that they found some blood that did not belong to anybody on Charlie's clothing. So it was some other clothing that the blood that they were involved. And so I think that was their main argument, was that like something else happened, and that gets to a different suspect. So those are the kind of things that I remember from that article about what was found. So I guess I was joking with some people that in Florida you can have a confession by someone else and fingerprints on the sign at the crime scene, and you don't get a new trial. But in Baltimore, all you have to do is have a pulse, and you get a new trial. So right. This is in Florida. So I don't know where this is going to go with the new results, because the defense argument, and I don't buy it, and what they argued was that Charlie was the one who did this. He staged the bodies, and then his cohorts were like, we can't let him identify us, and they shot him too, and they bludgeoned him. I don't see why if he was for 2 problems that I have with that is that why would you rob the store when he was telling you that he was going to be there at 7:30? Unless it's very brutal to say, well, have him involved. I would think if you knew he was going to be at the store at 7:30, you'd go pick up the TV, know that he's going to be closed for Christmas Eve and has cash in there. You come back at 11 o'clock or whatever, midnight. You might have a key to the store because you work there, or maybe you asked for a key or whatever, and then you would steal it. You wouldn't go at the 7:30 time. And I don't see why, if you were just trying to burglarize the store, why you would stage the bodies. Why would you move them? You would normally just grab the cash and leave. So I guess my question to you, I guess you don't know this case in depth, or you've covered. Does this DNA or these tests that they come up with, does it leave you any doubt, or does it leave you enough doubt that there should be a new trial?
Well, I think one thing we should all start doing more of is reserving judgment on these DNA findings, because, and you raised Baltimore and Adnan Syed, I will never take at face value what a defense attorney says about DNA again. Because if you're out there listening and you don't know, or you just saw the headlines, you probably think DNA exonerated Adnan Syed, because that's what the defense said, and that's what the headlines said. And in fact, it was, we found some touch DNA on some shoes in the trunk. Okay. Like that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so I think in a case like this, obviously you have a lot of really good evidence against this person, including an eyewitness who conveniently is now deceased. So that's the other problem when you get these, oh, we got to have why not have a new trial? Justice demands it. Well, half the witnesses are dead. You're not probably going to have a new trial. If the man's conviction is vacated, he'll probably just be released. But I think what you need and the proper thing, you're claiming you have new evidence. There's a process for examining new evidence. You can file a motion that says, hey, we got new evidence. We want to have an evidentiary hearing. And then we can hammer this out in court. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear what the prosecution has to say. I want to hear what the experts have to say. I want to hear what is reality. Because just because they write it in a filing doesn't necessarily mean anything. Obviously, a lot of this, I think, there was blood. There was always the issue. My understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this. We always knew there was blood on various people belonging to various people, right? We had the typing. They could do the blood typing. They didn't have the DNA. And that was something that had been raised previously. And I think the courts have said, look, we don't know exactly how this went down. We don't know how much of a struggle there was. We don't know who was near who when various people were getting killed. So it's possible that blood is on different people because of how it went down. It doesn't necessarily mean, for instance, if there's blood on Mays from someone else, well, that means he's the killer, right? And I think the DNA, I would be interested to know about that as well. Like, what kind of DNA are we talking about? Where is the DNA located? Who does it belong to? Or if it's just the absence of DNA, that is a lot less convincing to me. If you're saying, look, he should have DNA on him and we tested him and he doesn't have DNA on him. Okay, well, that's interesting, but doesn't necessarily mean he didn't do it. We've seen this. DNA is not magic. This is not CSI. Even in crimes where you think a certain thing should happen a certain way, it doesn't mean you're going to find what you expect to find. It's like he should have blood on him. Presumably, that is from if you shoot someone at close enough range, there's going to be blood that blows back on you. But we have a theory. The prosecution has a theory about how this went down and where everybody was, but I don't know that that's a sure thing. So to me, the defense in a lot of these cases, they do a really good job of putting forward their best story based on the evidence as they see it. That's their job. That's what they do every day. That's why they get paid. The news media just runs with it always, because the news media loves nothing more than an innocent story. And I think you see this in the coverage of this filing, because that's all it is. It's a filing by the defense, and the media just ran with it as, oh, he's innocent. This proves he's innocent, right? And I think I want to see this go through the system. I want to see it tested in court, and then I'll make some sort of call. But I think we should all be skeptical when you have all this evidence, and you've laid out a lot of it. The fact that there's a lot of evidence that the parents and the wife were killed well before anyone else. That just doesn't make any sense, given the story that we want to be, that we're fed now. You have to believe that this Charlie guy who did call the police, I think it was Charlie, one of them.
No,
the guy
Charlie's
who called
dead.
The police.
Edward Williams.
Edward.
Is the one.
Yeah, there you go. Williams.
Right.
Yeah. Charlie Mays, Edward Williams. That Williams, even though, like, why would he do that, right? Like, why would he call the police? You're talking about staging the bodies. If you're robbing a place, when you fire a gun, what do you know? That's loud. Someone might have heard that. Most people engaged in a robbery, if they're not directly connected, the first thing they're going to do is get out of there. And that's not what happened here. So, yeah, I mean, this story we're being told is pretty unbelievable. It may be true, and maybe the DNA evidence proves it's true, but I'm not going to assume that just based on some defense attorney's filing.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the summary. So I guess, it does sound like they're at the stage. They got the results back. So I don't know. I think the judge has to rule whether or not there's enough for a new or for an evidentiary hearing. So that's what I think where they're at. And it will probably happen in the next couple months if it happens. I mean, not all cases are like add-on where you get the results on Friday and there's a hearing on Monday or a closed-door hearing that Friday afternoon. So it will be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, it's Florida, and I guess it always depends on the judge too. Because I don't think that's the whole reason that the attorney general argued against the DNA testing was kind of the scenario was saying that, hey, we might get something inconclusive, and all it's going to add is like maybe we don't know the exact story of what order the people were killed, or I think we know the order the people were killed in, but but I don't buy the story that after shooting Ziegler and the parents that he staged the bodies. So I don't. And that's what the defense's theory is. Why I think they also talked about some of. I don't think I understood it. They talked about the fiber rugs, um, and it being like the wife had some Persian cat rugs,
Right.
and whether and how the bodies got moved. I mean, it was also strange. I think they might have determined or one of the times of death because the bullet actually lodged in a clock and stopped the clock.
Hmm.
So there you go with a whole new time of death, right? So when the clock stopped. So, but yeah, I don't think there's enough for this one to say that he's innocent or not. I know the guy is like in his 80s now. I mean, maybe you release him on compassion, but I don't think there's enough to overrule this. It's just weird to be on the death row for like 50 years, right? In Florida.
Yeah. And I don't know. And sometimes you see that and it makes you wonder if there was somebody in the process who kind of had some doubts. And so they've slow played it for those reasons. So that's always sort of an interesting question because Florida does move pretty quickly. And for someone who murdered this many people, like if this is true, if he did this, it's one of the most vicious, calculated, evil murders you can imagine. Murdering your wife, your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, trying to bring these guys in to murder them, to frame them. I mean, that's rough, but they didn't move very quickly to execute him. Like you said, he's been on death row. I think he's like 80 now. I mean, he's old now. He's a very old man, and he's never going to be executed. I think we can be sure about that. And this has been going back and forth, like you said, this DNA stuff. And look, I think people out there in the world, they have trouble understanding, why do you oppose DNA testing? Why just test the evidence, right? I mean, it's easy to say that. And one of the reasons is because, if you're the prosecutor for the state, you got this guy who you feel absolutely certain is guilty. You feel like there's a mountain of evidence against. He's calling out hits from the prison. He's a bad guy. You want to keep him there. And if they do this DNA testing, it doesn't matter what the results are. Whatever the results are, the defense is going to be able to spin it as this is proof that the guy's innocent. Because there's never, DNA very rarely, unless it's like, something like a rape case, which is like the DNA is the evidence. I don't know. To me, it's hard to even imagine a situation in which you have a person who was involved in the crime. Either way, whether he's involved as a victim or is involved as a perpetrator, the DNA is always going to be inconclusive. There's going to be his DNA places where maybe it quote unquote shouldn't be, but he's going to say, well, that's because I was getting shot and, there was a struggle or whatever, or it was my wife, or it was, I shook my father-in-law's hands, or I knew, these guys who were there, I knew him. I talked to him earlier. So yeah, of course my DNA is on him. Right. But my DNA isn't in this one place. Why? I don't know. Because he didn't happen to leave DNA on that one spot, but he's going to seize on that and say, see, there's not DNA where, CSI Miami would tell you it should have been. And since that's not there, I'm innocent. I couldn't have done it. Despite the mountain of evidence to the contrary, the absence of DNA, I'm innocent. So if you're the prosecutor, that's what they're going to do. That's how it's going to go. And so you're like, look, you're not actually looking for the truth here. You're just trying to come up with some cheap way to get your murderer client off. And so they're going to oppose that. So I don't have a problem with that. And I think people need to be a little bit more circumspect every time a defendant demands DNA testing to think about why someone might, in good faith, oppose that testing.
Correct. And I guess you talked about it some, and I didn't bring it up. It was also the big argument they had was the blowback of the guns. They were like, well, if he was shot within 2 feet or whatever, or if any of them were shot within 2 feet, why wasn't there blood all over his clothes? The one question I had is, I don't know if I caught it. Did anybody know if he changed clothes? He had like 2 hours between the first and the last. I don't think anybody knew what he wore going to the. If he was that calculated,
and why would you if he's guilty? If he's guilty, and that's the thing. Like if you assume his story's true, then he didn't change clothes. So obviously, he's innocent, right? Because there's no blood on him. But why would you assume that? If he did it, he killed 3 people. He left. He talked to some other people. He came back. He killed those people. He then staged the scene. He then at some point shot himself in the stomach. Yeah. Why do you assume he's wearing the same clothes? In fact, given the thought he's put into this, you would think he wouldn't be wearing the same clothes. That he would have planned for exactly that, to make sure that there was no evidence that he had committed the crime. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I don't really find that all that convincing. I also would like to know more about how they know the distance, because you can tell there are things you can look at when someone's shot to determine how close or how far away they are. But I would be interested just to know what that's based on, because people get that wrong a lot too.
Maybe I'm wrong, because I remember, like, I thought they could figure out like 3 different ranges based on, like, if there's gun residue like on the person, they know that it's within like 2 feet, whatever, or right up close. Then they have 2 to 8 feet or something, like within 10 feet they thought, and then longer distance. I don't think they.
So there's basically, you can look at, are there burns on the skin? If there are burns on the skin, then they were close enough that the muzzle flash burned them. So that's a very close one. There's like tattooing. So gunpowder, actually, if you're a little bit further away but still pretty close, gunpowder will be embedded in the skin, because the excess gunpowder that's being blown out of the weapon can be embedded in the skin. And then if you're a little bit further away, it's gunpowder residue, so you don't see the burning, you don't see the stippling, but you can get gunpowder residue, which shows you that that was sort of some residual residue. But beyond that, it's impossible to tell.
Yeah, and it was very interesting. Like when I was also reading that I mean, I think we get so spoiled from watching TV shows where they'll be like, well, we know that the time of death was 7:16, and like, well, her eyelids were 3/4 closed or whatever. And but I mean, he said from the lividity, I'll give you an hour between 8, or it was like an hour either way of 8 p.m. And that's all the medical examiner really could say about the time of death of those people. So it's always other facts that they figure out time of death. I think we're spoiled from CSI that they get it within a minute, and that when the doctor or the ME's at the site, they can tell you all these things like right at the site. I guess the shows have to move on, because it'd be really boring if you go back to the medical examiner, and then a month later you finally figure out the estimated time of death, where they have to have it to make the show run. So yeah, so I mean, I guess if you do, as I said, if you love forensics, this is a really interesting case with the fight, where all the bullets are. There was, where they were tracing them out, and how many were in each body, how many different guns. Several of the guns jammed, which kind of goes with William's story. One of them, I think, was even found like maybe in a car. I read that at the end. So as I said, if you want to read more about this case, Fatal Flaw by Philip Finch was a good resource. It's actually online. This is a 50-year-old case. So, it's only back in the news because of the DNA testing. And so I think that's about it that I have for this case. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of add?
The only thing I would say about it is also, I think it's worth remembering, again, this is a 50-year-old case. So even some of the techniques they might have used at the time to do things like time of death have probably been either updated or, ruled out altogether. Sometimes, obviously, the police, the forensics and all that, they're trying to figure out what happened. But every now and then they'll make a mistake that actually becomes a hook for the defense, because the defendant knows if he did it, he knows exactly how it went down. He knows exactly when it happened. He knows exactly the order. He knows exactly who was shot with what. And so if he hears them making a mistake, a lot of times you'll see that becomes the thing they really grab onto, because they know that's not how it happened. You're wrong about that. So.
Okay. I think that's about it. I'm going to start the recording. Can you hang out for another minute or two?
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to an episode of The Roundup. Be safe out there, and remember, don't do anything bad that will end up on one of my episodes.